The radio crackled, once then fell silent. All that patrol found at the wire fence was her rifle, streaked with blood. At FOB Red Mesa. The word spread fast. Sergeant Aria Monroe had been taken. Her name was scratched off the duty roster. A captain muttered. Figures. Intel sergeants fold when it gets close. Laughter followed. A funeral without a body. But 14 hours later, the war room froze mid-briefing. The tent flaps snapped open, and Aria stepped through. Uniform torn, sand crusting her face, wrists raw from cut ties. Behind her shuffled 9 Taliban fighters, flex-cuffed, heads bowed. The same men who were supposed to have dragged her off. A colonel's coffee mug halted mid-air. Eyes wide, no one spoke, because the quiet intel sergeant they had erased from the roster had just walked back in carrying a victory that rewrote the mission itself. At first, no one moved. A coffee mug froze halfway to a colonel's lips. Rangers in the briefing circle stared like they were seeing a ghost, because the quiet intel sergeant who was never invited on raids had just marched in with a victory that made their mission orders look obsolete. Aria Monroe didn't fit the picture of a battlefield legend. 5'4", built like a distance runner, more likely to be mistaken for a contractor than a commando. Her badge said intelligence support activity, the kind of job most people thought meant sifting through drone footage, not dismantling an enemy compound alone. But the truth ran deeper. For 3 weeks straight, she'd been the invisible one logging weapons, running comms, moving between tents without anyone noticing. To the Rangers, she was background noise. To the Taliban, she was nothing at all, and that was her advantage. Because when people choose not to see you, you can move in places they never imagine. Still, nothing in her file explained how she returned with 9 prisoners shackled and alive. The official story was already writing itself. Maybe she got lucky. Maybe she stumbled into a chance no operator could predict. Captain Turner leaned forward, disbelief hardening into irritation. He wanted to strip the legend before it grew. But one look at the prisoners trailing behind her made it clear luck didn't put zip ties on 9 armed fighters. Aria kept her eyes forward, not acknowledging the whispers or the stares. She walked as if this was nothing more than another daily report. Yet inside, the memory of the past 14 hours still burned the cold mountain wind. The collapsed supply shaft she'd crawled through. The hostages' wide eyes when she cut their bonds. Those details would stay locked until someone demanded them, and they would demand them. By the time the gates slammed shut behind her, the base knew one truth: this wasn't the same quiet sergeant they thought they'd ignored. Something had shifted, and when Colonel Adrian Locke finally spoke, his words cut through the murmurs like a blade. Get her in the debrief room, now. What no one in that tent realized was this: Aria Monroe had been preparing for this moment her entire life. Long before Afghanistan, long before Red Mesa, long before anyone thought a woman could outfox the Taliban, the story of how she survived, how she turned capture into command, was only just beginning. Before we brief the mission, sound off in the comments where you're watching from, soldier, and hit that subscribe, so you're in the fight when the next part drops. Weekends in Montana weren't for sleeping in or football games. For Aria Monroe, they meant being dropped 10 miles from home with nothing but a map, a compass, and a canteen. Her grandfather, Elias Monroe, the Vietnam War LRRP scout who raised her, would give a simple order: find your way back. Trust your training, not your fear. The mountains were her first classroom. Snowdrifts taught her how wind could reshape a landscape overnight. Elk trails showed her how to separate fresh movement from tracks a week old. By 16, she could tell from the bend of grass whether someone was walking burdened or light, friend or intruder. Those lessons burned into her bones long before the Army ever issued her a uniform. At Fort Huxton's intelligence school, instructors noticed the difference. She didn't just read terrain maps, she felt them. Satellite imagery wasn't pixels to her, it was memory. Instinct, muscle, during SEER training at Fort Bragg. She evaded capture for 6 days when most recruits lasted 2. When instructors tracked her prints into a canyon, they found only emptiness. She doubled back on her own trail, scaled a rock face no one thought possible, and ghosted out. It wasn't long before a quiet recruiter from a shadow program noticed. They weren't looking for the biggest or loudest. They wanted someone overlooked, underestimated, invisible. That's how Aria found herself inside the Army's most secretive intelligence support activity the unit whispered about as the people who disappear in hostile territory, gather what no satellite can, and return without leaving a trace. Afghanistan was the ultimate test. Male soldiers glanced at her badge and saw only a female analyst. Taliban fighters saw nothing at all. That invisibility was her armor. That underestimation was her weapon. Still, nothing prepared her for the mission briefing that set everything in motion. The room was packed Rangers, air controllers, intel officers, maps projected on the wall. Captain Blake Turner stood at the front, stabbing a finger at the feed from a Reaper drone. 20 fighters. Taliban compound. They're holding 4 hostages, 1 American contractor, a British nurse, 2 NGO staffers. We hit at 0300. Aria raised her hand. Calm, precise. Captain, I've been tracking this cell for months. Their pattern shows they move prisoners at 0200 every 3rd night. Tonight is the 3rd night. At 0300 that compound will be empty. Turner didn't even look at her. His jaw flexed as he clicked to the next slide. Intel sticks to analysis. Operators handle combat. The room tightened with silence. Even the Air Force CCT shifted uncomfortably. Aria tried again, pulling up her report. 67 days of surveillance, guard rotations, patterns logged down to bathroom breaks. Sir, this isn't theory, it's field work. Turner waved her off like a fly. We've got real-time drone coverage. That's what matters, not your paper trails. From the corner, Colonel Adrian Locke didn't bother glancing up from his tablet. His voice was dismissive, almost bored. Intel always thinks they know better than ground forces. That's why you sit behind desks while we do the real work. Aria felt the heat rise but didn't flinch. She closed the report and spoke with a calm that cut sharper than anger. Sir, I've been inside that compound twice. The room exploded. Chairs scraped back. Voices overlapped. Turner slammed his palm against the table. Impossible. Nobody gets inside without authorization. His glare was fury and disbelief wrapped in one. But Aria didn't back down. She had proof. She had photos. She had details no satellite could ever see. And revealing them would turn the entire room on its head. Aria Monroe didn't raise her voice. She tapped her tablet, its glow spilling across the plywood table like a spotlight. The images were grainy but undeniable hallways mapped from the inside. Guard rotations logged to the minute, and a narrow shaft under the north wall the kind satellites never revealed. Colonel Adrian Locke finally looked up, his voice hard steel. Unauthorized reconnaissance. Do you realize you could have compromised this entire operation? Aria held his gaze. They don't know I exist. Sir, to them I'm a faceless villager collecting wood. I've walked past their sentries 30 times. Not once have they truly looked at me. The tent froze in silence until Captain Blake Turner's laugh split the air. What's your angle? Sergeant want to tag along. Pretend you're one of us for a night. Her tone stayed level. No, sir. I'm telling you your raid at 0300 will hit an empty compound. The hostages will be gone through that shaft at 0200, and your men will be walking into an ambush. Turner's fist slammed against the table. Enough. But Aria slid a folder forward. Each page scrawled with shorthand. 67 days of surveillance, patterns down to bathroom breaks. The youngest guard lights a cigarette 6 minutes into every shift. The cook kicks dirt over the tunnel entrance while dumping wastewater. Their commander, same Spetsnaz boots every day, worn to the soul. These are rhythms no drone feed will ever show you. Unease rippled through the room. Even the Air Force combat controller stared at his notes instead of meeting Turner's eyes. Locke's voice dropped lower. Intel always thinks it sees clearer than ground forces. That's why Intel stays behind desks, while Rangers take the real risks." He paused, then declared, "The mission proceeds as planned. Sergeant Monroe, you're confined to base pending Article 15 review." His tone was firm, but the flicker in his eyes betrayed doubt, like a man silencing the voice he feared might be right. Back in her hooch, the walls felt closer. On her pack leaned the photo of her grandfather Elias Monroe, the LRRP scout who'd once refused to lead his men into a kill zone at Hill 303. 12 soldiers had lived because instinct mattered more than rank. She opened her battered notebook. Pencil lines marked every quirk she'd tracked the ember of a cigarette in the dark, the splash of wastewater on packed soil, Russian boots creaking on stone. Small details, but together they told a story satellites would never understand. Closing it, she lifted the footlocker lid. A plain tunic, a headscarf, worn sandals her disguise. Next to them, a bottle of goat blood collected at the bazaar. Insurance, if things went wrong. The Taliban would believe she'd been taken, and so would command. She'd staged it carefully. Earlier that evening, she fired 2 suppressed rounds into the dirt near the wire. Powder residue hung in the air. Minutes later, a jittery patrol radioed the smell back to the TUC. When they stumbled on her boots soaked red, the picture was complete. By dawn, the base would believe she was gone. Misdirection, a mask, the only way to move freely. Her watch read 22:30. Guard shift would turn in 30 minutes. Midnight was the real deadline the hostages would not see, 0300. She wrapped the scarf around her hair, slid into the sandals, and looked once more at her grandfather's photo. "Trust your training, not your fear." The words left her lips as a whisper. Then she stepped into the Afghan night, leaving behind the identity they dismissed and carrying forward the one that might save lives or end hers. The Afghan night pressed close, sharp and watchful. Aria Monroe slipped through the scrub, every step chosen, every sound weighed. At the fence line, the young guard lit his cigarette, the ember glowing in the dark. 6 minutes into his shift exactly as she'd logged. His eyes never left the cracked screen of his phone. Routine. Predictable. Weakness. She ghosted past the motor pool, pausing just long enough to tug a fuse free from one Hilux and loosen another. By the time anyone reached the trucks, they'd be dead weight. Then she lowered herself into the collapsed shaft. The Taliban had abandoned it after a cave-in, but Aria knew better. Childhood summers spent crawling Montana mine shafts had trained her for passages tighter than this. Gravel scraped her palms as she slid forward, dirt sprinkling her scarf. To most, it was a tomb. To her, a doorway. Inside. She pressed against the cool stone and listened. 2 guards outside the cellar. 1 inside, above. Muffled laughter and clinking glasses. They believed dawn would bring profit 4 Western hostages sold across the border to a Pakistani broker. Her watch read 23:0. The buyer was early. Turner's raid at 300 was suicide. Her grandfather's words cut through the haze. When everyone else is wrong and you're right, you don't wait for permission. You act. A pebble clattered against metal, just as expected. 1 guard went to investigate, the second trailing him. Aria slipped between them, shoulders hunched in the posture of a villager. By the time they looked back, she was gone. The cellar reeked of kerosene. 1 guard slumped in a chair, AK across his lap. 4 captives were tied to posts an American contractor, a British nurse clutching a bloody bandage, and 2 NGO staffers barely conscious. 1 man lifted his head. His face was battered, but the eyes gave him away alert. Calculating, not just a civilian. Former SS, Aria guessed. An advisor turned hostage. The guard stirred. Decision time. Aria slid behind him, locked a vascular restraint, and counted 8 silent seconds until he sagged. She lowered him gently to the floor. The SAS man's gaze caught hers, No words, only understanding. She cut his bonds, slipped her Glock into his hand, and pointed at the secondary shaft hidden behind grain sacks. He nodded, freeing the others quickly, quietly. Then boots hammered above. Multiple pairs, voices in Urdu, sharp and angry. The buyer was here early and impatient. The cellar door swung open. The Taliban commander stepped in first, Spetsnaz boots shining under the lantern light. 2 fighters flanked him, rifles raised. Behind them, the Pakistani broker's eyes glittered with greed. Aria stood where the prisoners should have been, head bowed, scarf low, body curved like someone broken. The commander's eyes narrowed. Suspicion edged into his stare. His hand twitched toward his weapon. She moved first, but with words. Her Pashto was flawless, urgent. Rangers, northern perimeter. They're already here. The commander froze. His radio crackled phantom signatures seated by her beacon. The illusion of boots closing in. Fear spread fast. Everyone remembered the last ranger raid, no prisoners, only corpses. Aria pulled a folded page from her tunic, the ops order she'd photographed from Turner's briefing. She held it high. North wall breach, 20 minutes. Your tunnels are collapsed. That Hilux by the east gate. It won't save you in time. The Pakistani spat a curse and bolted for the stairs. The fighters shifted, eyes darting to their commander. Pride clashed with survival. The commander's jaw locked. Seconds stretched, then, slowly. He lowered his rifle. His men followed, shame burning in their eyes. "On your knees," Aria ordered. Daniel raised the Glock, covering them, one by one. The fighters zip-tied each other under her command, wrists pulled tight by their own hands. By 0300, when the quick reaction force stormed the compound, the fight was already over. No shots, no heroics. Just 9 Taliban prisoners waiting on their knees, and a story too sharp, too unbelievable, to ever make it into the official record. The cellar stank of sweat and kerosene. 9 Taliban fighters knelt on the dirt floor, wrists bound tight with NATO zip ties. Above them, the sound of distant boots thudded closer, not rangers, but the quick reaction force Aria had signaled with her beacon. She'd never meant it as rescue, only misdirection. False movement signatures to terrify the commander into surrender. The real soldiers would arrive at 300 too late to matter. When the QRF finally stormed the compound, they found no battle waiting, no firefight, no resistance. Just 9 prisoners shackled in silence, and 4 hostages already being led out through a side shaft by a bruised, battered SAS veteran. The Rangers, under Captain Turner, arrived moments later and stared at an empty objective, exactly as Aria had warned. By dawn, the whispers had spread across FOB Red Mesa. A dismissed intel sergeant had achieved in one night what an entire ranger platoon could not, freeing captives, capturing fighters, outmaneuvering a Taliban network, and vanishing before credit could stick. The debrief stretched 8 long hours. Turner sat mute, fury and humiliation fighting for space in his eyes. Colonel Locke read the after-action reports without expression until a single line forced him to pause. The Pakistani broker they'd captured in flight wasn't just a middleman. He was tied to a multi-million-dollar hostage pipeline fueling Taliban operations across 3 provinces. It was proof Aria hadn't gambled. She'd calculated, and she'd been right. Locke found her later in the ready room. She sat on a bench, cleaning her rifle with steady strokes, the way her grandfather had once shown her patience in every movement. Locke surprised everyone by standing at attention before speaking. "Your tactical assessment was correct. Sergeant, my judgment was flawed. The mission succeeded because of your actions." His voice was flat, but the respect was unmistakable. Aria didn't look up. The cloth kept moving along the barrel. Locke cleared his throat. "A recommendation for the Distinguished Service Cross has been submitted, effective immediately. Intelligence analysts will have tactical input authority and operational planning." Only then did Aria raise her eyes, calm and unyielding. "Colonel, there are more of us, women who can move where men can't. who operate unseen because people choose not to see us, for a long moment. Locke held her gaze. Then, stiffly, he nodded. Understood. Sergeant, that will be addressed. Later. Outside the barracks, the former SAS operator approached the hostage she had freed, now revealed as Daniel Cross. 14 years in Special Forces, his body scarred by old campaigns. He studied her the way only one soldier studies another. You move like smoke, he said quietly. Where did you learn that Aria's lips curved faintly? Montana winters. A grandfather who believed the best warriors are the ones nobody sees coming. Same lesson he carried out of Vietnam. He survived because enemies underestimated him. Daniel smiled. Weary but sincere. My daughter wants to be a soldier. Everyone says she's too headstrong. Aria slung the rifle across her shoulder, her voice steady as stone. Then tell her they're wrong. And teach her to prove it. The battlefield doesn't always reward the loudest voice or the strongest arm. Sometimes, victory belongs to the one nobody saw coming. Remember that the next time someone underestimates you,